begin in a couple of minutes the meeting of the Committee on Democracy, Human Rights and Humanitarian Questions. All right, good morning, everybody. I call the meeting of the General Committee on Democracy and Human Rights and Humanitarian Questions to order. I want to remind the colleagues that the election of the committee officers for the 22nd annual session of the Assembly will take place during the committee's final session on Sunday. Nominations for candidates for election should be handed into the table office no later than the start of that session. That means before 9 a.m. tomorrow morning, which is Sunday. Also, if you have a prepared text for your speeches, please provide it to the Secretariat so that they can give it to the interpreters and will facilitate their work. And also switch off your cell phone or keep it away from the microphone, especially when you speak, because that will interfere with the equipment and with the work of our translator. Now we have also today to adopt our draft agenda. And the draft agenda starts with the consideration of amendments to the supplementary item that we began yesterday on Belarus. And there are 14 amendments to this supplementary item. Then we will move to consider the report and draft resolution on the general theme of this year's annual session, which is the OSCE region of change. And there are 38 proposed amendments to the draft resolution, which has been prepared by our rapporteur, Chascun Chorus from the Netherlands, who is joining us today, and we welcome to the work of our committee. So I propose that the draft agenda be adopted. Are there any objections? If not, we consider the agenda adopted. Also, I want to remind the delegates and the colleagues who want to speak in the debate on the draft resolutions to give their names to the committee secretary in each debate as early as possible. So we start with the first item on the agenda, which is the consideration of the amendments to the draft resolution on Belarus, sponsored by Mr. Tony Lloyd.
Господин председатель.
Pardon?
Спасибо, господин председатель. Я все-таки просила бы обращать внимание на зал. Мне кажется, требует пояснения логика выбора порядка обсуждения вопросов в нашей комиссии. Мы начали с вами с дополнительных пунктов. Сейчас мы дополнительный пункт перебиваем опять докладом. Остаются еще дополнительные пункты. Какая логика вообще движения по всему спектру повестки дня? Во всех комиссиях у нас очень понятные, очень организованные доклады, обсуждения, затем дополнительные пункты повестки дня.
Yes, Ms. Mazai, thank you for your statement, but we just adopted the agenda, which I had proposed and nobody spoke against, so the agenda is adopted. The reason for this agenda this morning is that yesterday we were not able to discuss the report by Mr. Chascun Chorus because he was not able to be here because of some political commitments in the parliaments of the Netherlands. So he could join us only today, and that is the reason why we discussed the report today and not yesterday. So that is the explanation, and the committee just adopted the agenda, so everything is clear so far, I think, in terms of procedural issues of our committee. So I would like now to move on to discuss the amendments to the supplementary item on Belarus. As I said, 14 amendments have been tabled to the resolution, and while we do the consideration of these supplementary items, I will give to the sponsor and proposer of the amendments the time to speak for at least 1 or 2 minutes, because we have many, many amendments, and then I will give the same time to one speaker who will oppose the amendment. Then we will ask the sponsor of the draft resolution his opinion on the amendment, and we'll proceed with the vote. So I now call on Mr. Tony Lloyd, where is the UK delegation? Somewhere? All right, I'll give the floor to present amendment number 1.
Thank you, Mr. McCatchy. This amendment, I think, is very straightforward. It's actually a matter of fact. But perhaps I should add to this matter of fact that the failure of the Belarusian authorities to cooperate properly with ODIHR is regrettable, because ODIHR are not there to wave a big stick. They are there to help. They're there, obviously, to offer advice and to offer a capacity to improve the electoral structures in particular, and the capacity of the people of Belarus to take part in a free and fair election. So I think it is important to draw attention to the fact that the cooperation with ODIHR ought to take place, and that so far this has not been the case, and so I would wish to move this amendment.
Thank you, Mr. Lloyd. Anybody against amendment number 1? If not, I think we don't need to ask Mr. Lloyd's opinion on the amendment because he proposed it. So we shall now put it to the vote. Will those in favor of amendment number 1 please raise your voting card? I don't have my voting card, but anyway. Thank you. Those against? 1. Abstentions? 1 abstention. So amendment number 1 is adopted. Now we move to amendment number 2, and I call on Ms. Lindestam of Sweden to present this amendment. You have the floor.
Thank you, Chair. Yes, this is about a report of the United Nations High Commissioner on Human Rights on Belarus and the adoption of the resolution on Belarus at June 2012 session on the UN Human Rights Council, as well as the establishment of the post of the UN Human Rights Council Special Rapporteur on Belarus. And I think it's very important that these words come into the text also. Thank you.
Thank you, Ms. Lindestam. Does anybody want to speak against amendment number 2? If not, we vote. No, we ask Mr. Tony Lloyd his opinion on the amendment.
I'm happy to accept this amendment.
Thank you, Mr. Lloyd. Now we put amendment number 2 to the vote. Those in favor of adopting amendment number 2, raise your cards. I can vote too. Those against? Two against. Abstentions? No abstentions. So amendment number 2 is adopted. I call again on Ms. Lindestam from Sweden to present amendment number 3. You have the floor, madam.
Thank you, Chair. This is about the political prisoners that are in Belarus today. We know some of them, and they are arrested on political grounds, and they have not been given a fair trial, a proper fair trial. So I think this is also words that need to be in the text. Thank you.
Thank you, Ms. Lindestam. Anybody against amendment number 3? No, so I can ask to, yes, okay. Russian Federation, you have.
Алимова. Мне кажется, эту поправку принимать никак нельзя, потому что ничем не подкреплено, никакие заявления здесь просто констатируются, выражают сожаление, что выборы прошли недемократично. Ничем не подкрепляется, поэтому Российская Федерация будет голосовать против.
Thank you very much. I call on Mr. Lloyd to give his opinion on this amendment.
I think, Mr. McCatchy, it's totally acceptable. I think it is well known that there are political prisoners being held in Belarus. And I think it's important that we register that fact. So I would support the amendment.
All right. So we put the amendment number 3 to the vote. Those in favor, amendment number 3, raise your cards. Thank you. Those against? 1. Abstentions? 2. 3 abstentions. Thank you very much. So amendment number 3 is adopted. I now call on Mr. Lloyd to present amendment number 4. You have the floor.
Thank you, Mr. McCatchy. Again, this amendment actually does make it clear that we've become aware that both Andrei Sannikov and Zmystra Bandarenka did in fact suffer both extreme physical and psychological pressure and inhuman and degrading treatment during the period of their incarceration, and we ought to register this fact.
Thank you. Anybody against amendment number 4? No. So, right. Mr. Rashkin from the Russian Federation, you have the floor.
Уважаемые коллеги, в таком тексте нельзя принимать данную поправку, потому что она призывает вмешиваться во внутренние дела государства суверенного. Есть суды, есть законодательство, есть нормативы следственных органов, которые в Беларуси при расследовании выполняются, а здесь поправка говорит категорически о том, чтобы незамедлительно и безоговорочно освободить, оправдать всех заключенных политических в Беларуси, в том числе приговоренных к условному наказанию. Есть определенная процедура, поэтому в такой категорической форме считаем, что данный пункт поправки принимать нельзя. Спасибо.
Thank you, Mr. Rashkin. We already heard from Mr. Tony Lloyd, so we put amendment number 4 to... Sorry?
Because somebody spoke and you need to ask.
All right. I have to ask anyway, Mr. Tony Lloyd, his opinion because someone spoke against it.
I think, in actual fact, the speaker against was referring to a different amendment. Nevertheless, let me simply say this, that this is a basic statement of fact. And even if there are courts and processes in Belarus, we know those courts are not fair courts. And we know that whilst the repression of prisoners is against the conventions that Belarus has signed, it nevertheless takes place and therefore does deserve international condemnation.
Okay, thank you, Mr. Lloyd. So we put amendment number 4 to the vote. Those in favor of adopting amendment number 4, raise your cards. Thank you. Those against? 2 abstentions. 2 abstentions. Thank you. So amendment number 4 is adopted. And I'll call on Ms. Lindestam from Sweden to present amendment number 5. You have the floor. But Valburga will speak now.
I'll present it to make it a little bit more sort of different. I think that this is a very important thing, that because what we here try to say is that if you legally try to infringe on human rights, it doesn't make it more legal for that, and that the laws that infringe on human rights must be removed. And I think that this is a very important statement. Therefore, I hope for the adoption of this amendment.
Thank you, Ms. Salzburg-Douglas. Anybody wish to speak against amendment number 5? None. So what is the opinion of Mr. Tony Lloyd of the amendment?
I am in favour.
Thank you very much. So we put amendment number 5 to the vote. Those in favor, please raise your cards. Thank you. Those against? None. 1. 2. Abstentions? 1 abstention. So amendment number 5 is adopted. I now call on Ms. Zaf from Germany to present amendment number 6. You have the floor, madam.
Vielen herzlichen Dank. Es geht auch wieder hier um die Namenhaftmachung von politischen Gefangenen. Und ich glaube, das Verfahren, das Amnesty anwendet bei der Analyse von politischen Gefangenen, ist völlig unanfechtbar, jedenfalls in den demokratischen Staaten, die Menschenrechte unterstützen. Und deshalb finde ich es auch in Ordnung, wenn wir auch in dieser Resolution noch mal ausdrücklich namentlich diejenigen, die dort leiden unter dem Regime, die eingesperrt wurden, die unschuldig verfolgt worden sind, hier zu benennen. Ich glaube, als OSZE-Parlamentarier sind wir Ihnen das schuldig. Danke.
Thank you, Ms. Zaf. Anybody wish to speak against amendment number 6? Mr. Rashkin from the Russian Federation, you have the floor.
Уважаемые коллеги, я прошу прощения. Действительно, предыдущее мое выступление было в поправке 6. Аргументация, которая была моя изложена, просил бы учесть по незамедлительности, безоговорочно освободить оправданно всех политических заключенных. Есть свои процедуры, они абсолютно демократичные, прописаны в законодательстве и исполняются. Поэтому в данной категоричной форме, считаю, поправку принимать нельзя. Спасибо.
Thank you very much, Mr. Raskin. Call on Mr. Tony Lloyd to give us his opinion on the amendment. You have the floor.
I'm in favour of the amendment for the obvious reason that there should be no political prisoners in any country in the world. To be a prisoner simply for your political views is unacceptable. So I hope we will adopt this amendment.
Thank you very much, Mr. Lloyd. We now put amendment number 6 to the vote. Those in favor of adopting amendment number 6, please raise your cards. Thank you. Those against? 3 against. 4 abstentions. 1 abstention. So amendment number 6 is adopted. I now call on Ms. Viola von Kramon to speak about amendment number 7. You have the floor, madam.
Ja, vielen Dank. Wir haben jetzt schon viel über die politischen Gefangenen gesprochen und ich möchte auch in unserem Namen nochmal und vor allen Dingen im Namen der OSZE-Parlamentarier sagen, dass die Stimme von Kasachstan und Russland in diesem Fall eine ganz wichtige Stimme ist. Sie wird besonders gehört in Weißrussland. Und für die politischen Gefangenen ist es eben auch wichtig, dass diese beiden Länder die Frage der politischen Gefangenen in ihren Gesprächen mit auf die Tagesordnung setzen. Und deswegen würde ich mir wünschen, dass wir diesen Supplementary Item oder dieses Amendment noch mit verabschieden.
Thank you, Ms. von Kramon. Anybody wish to speak against amendment number 7? If yes, Mr. Rashkin from the Russian Federation, you have the floor.
Уважаемые коллеги, на основании двухсторонних договоренностей России и Белоруссии мы полностью выполняем все свои обязательства. Причем у нас есть многочисленные встречи на разных уровнях, начиная с президентов, правительств, парламентов. У нас есть совместные парламент России и Белоруссии, который утверждает в том числе и повестки дня, касающиеся исполнения в рамках договоренности ОБСЕ. Поэтому я считаю здесь лишним принятие такой поправки 7. Спасибо.
Thank you, Mr. Rashkin. What is the opinion of the principal sponsor, Mr. Tony Lloyd?
Well, I'm very pleased to hear that the Russian Federation acts in accordance with the OSCE commitments and principles, and I hope on that basis we can maintain this resolution on the basis that both our Russian colleagues and our Kazakh colleagues will raise exactly these issues with the Belarusian authorities about political prisoners. So I hope we will support the amendment.
Thank you, Mr. Tony Lloyd. So we put amendment number 7 to the vote. Those in favor, please raise your cards. Thank you. Those against? 3 against. Abstentions? 3 abstentions. Thank you very much. So amendment number 7 is adopted. Now I call again on Sweden, Ms. Lindestam, I understand, to present amendment number 8. Thank you.
Thank you, Chair. This is about the lawyers who are disparate from their professional activities in defending opposition and civil society representatives. So I would like to call on the authorities to reinstate these legal licenses for those lawyers. Thank you.
Thank you, Ms. Lindestam. Anybody wish to speak against amendment number 8? No? So we call on Mr. Tony Lloyd to give us his opinion on the amendment. You have the floor, sir.
I'm in favour.
Thank you very much. So we put amendment number 8 to the vote. Those in favor, raise your cards. Thank you. Those against? 2 against. Those who want to abstain? 1 abstention. So amendment number 8 is adopted. We now move to amendment number 9, and I call on Ms. Zaft from Germany to present the amendment.
Herzlichen Dank, Herr Vorsitzender. I have to look for it. Here it is. I think the fact that parties applying for registration again and again, and they are being refused this registration on very thin argumentation grounds, should be mentioned here, and we ask that the authorities in Belarus give them their registration so they can be free in their political work. Thank you.
Thank you very much, Ms. Zav. Anybody wish to speak against amendment number 9? Yes. You have Ms. Alimova, you have the floor.
Эту поправку принимать нельзя, потому что здесь говорит о том, что отказывает в регистрации этим правозащитным организациям и «Правда, говори, правду, молодой фронт», без должных на то оснований. На самом деле это просто юридически документально неправильно оформленные документы, поэтому эти политические организации или партии и правозащитные организации не могут зарегистрированы быть по тем законам, которые существуют в Беларуси. Поэтому поправку принимать нельзя.
Thank you very much, Ms. Alimova. I ask Mr. Tony Lloyd his opinion on the amendment. You have the floor.
I'm in favour of the amendment, Mr. McCatchy. I don't think this is simply a question of bureaucratic process. This is a political decision to not register these opposition voices, and that is an unacceptable practice. So I hope that the committee will accept the amendment.
Thank you very much. So we put amendment number 9 to the vote. Those in favor, please raise your cards. Thank you. Those against? 1, 2, 3. Abstentions? 2 abstentions. Thank you very much. Amendment number 9 is adopted. So we move to amendment number 10, and I call on Mr. Tony Lloyd to present the amendment.
Thank you, Mr. McCatchy. I think most people, most of us would accept that in a free and democratic society, the right to raise a voice, to, in some cases, to protest is important, and the kind of harassment and persecution of any opposition voices in Belarus is unacceptable, and particularly voices like those of trade unions and human rights defenders. I think most of us would say are central to the functioning of a properly functioning democratic society. So I hope the committee will support this amendment.
Thank you very much, Mr. Tony Lloyd. Anybody wish to speak against the amendment number 10? If not, we just move to vote on the amendment. Those in favor, please raise your card. Thank you. Those against? 2 against. Abstentions? 3 abstentions. So amendment number 10 is adopted. We now move to Amendment 11, and I call on Ms. Zaft of Germany to present the amendment.
Ja, herzlichen Dank. Ich möchte daran erinnern, dass Belarus immer wieder Angebote bekommen hat, von der Europäischen Union einen Dialog zu führen, Wege zu beschreiten, wie bestimmte von der Europäischen Union nicht akzeptierte Standards in Belarus verbessert werden können. Es sind wirklich immer wieder Anläufe gemacht worden, und jetzt gibt es noch dazu den europäischen Dialog beziehungsweise auch die östliche Partnerschaft. Ich fände es eine gute Sache, wenn Belarus sich diesem Dialogprozess anschließen würde, weil der Dialog ja zurzeit so ziemlich komplett abgebrochen ist, bis auf wenige Reste. Deshalb glaube ich, diese Aufforderung wäre gut, noch in diese Resolution einzubringen.
Thank you. Thank you, Ms. Zaff. Anybody wish to speak against Amendment 11? Yes. Ms. Alimova from the Russian Federation, you have the floor.
Эта поправка, она, в общем-то, противоречит действиям европейских стран, которые ввели санкции против Белоруссии, и поэтому сами практически уходят от диалога с Минском. Поэтому эта поправка, здесь, ее включения нет необходимости. Мы будем против голосовать.
Thank you very much. I call on Mr. Tony Lloyd to give us his opinion on amendment number 11.
Amendment 11 is a very sensible amendment, Mr. McCatchy. It offers a process whereby Belarus can take advantage of the assistance from the wider international community, and I hope that the Belarusian authorities will both heed this call and make full use of the European dialogue, so I support the amendment.
Thank you very much. So we put the amendment to the vote. Those in favor of Amendment 11, please raise your card. Thank you. Those against? 2 against. Those who want to abstain? 1 abstention. So Amendment 11 is adopted. Again, I call on Mr. Tony Lloyd to present Amendment 12. You have the floor.
Thank you, Mr. McCatchy. Andrei Pachobuk is an ethnic Pole, but a Belarusian national. He was works for a well-known Polish newspaper, but was recently arrested and charged with the offence of libel against the president. In most countries, we accept that criticism of our political leaders is part and parcel of a democratic society. So in this context, drawing attention to the particular case of Andrei Pachobuk is important. I should just add that the OSCE's representative on the freedom of the media, Dunya Mijatovic, has also raised this issue with great concern, and I hope we can support this amendment.
Thank you, Mr. Lloyd. Anybody wish to speak against Amendment 12? If not, we put the amendment to the vote. Those in favor, please raise your cards. Those against? 2 against. Abstentions? 3 abstentions. So Amendment 12 is adopted. I now call on Mr. Kulkuloglu from Turkey to present Amendment 13.
Thank you very much, Mr. Chair. From Turkey, Naci Bostancı. We proceed from the belief that sports should not become a subject in political discussions. This is why we ask for the deletion of the 24th article of the draft resolution in Belarus. At the same time, Turkey supports the democratization process, improvement of human rights and economic development in Belarus. In this context, we believe that the most appropriate approach towards Belarus is engagement and encouragement through constructive criticism. There should be a sustained dialogue between international community and Belarus with the aim of contributing to the reform process in the country. Such an approach will produce more benefits for all. Thank you.
Thank you very much. Anybody wish to speak against? Valburga Asbjørn Douglas from Sweden. You have the floor.
Thank you very much. In principle, I think it's correct that we should not mix sports and politics. But unfortunately, it's a case for Belarus that the regime is mixing politics and sports, and the president personally always tries to mix, especially ice hockey, with his politics and tries to take this to promote his politics. And therefore, I think it's very, very important that he does not get this platform to promote his politics even further.
Thank you very much. Call on Mr. Tony Lloyd to give us his opinion on the amendment. You have the floor.
Thank you, Mr. McCatchy. Obviously, this is probably the most controversial section of the report, and I do understand those who argue that sport and politics shouldn't mix. However, as Mrs. Habsburg-Douglas has just said, we know in the case of Belarus that the mixing of politics and sport is almost in the DNA of President Lukashenko. There is no doubt that the awarding of the International World Hockey Championship to Belarus has been taken on board by the authorities in Belarus as a sign of international acceptance of their role. So for those reasons, I hope that we will resist this amendment and maintain the text as it stands.
Thank you, Mr. Lloyd. So we now put the amendment to the vote. I cannot open the floor for other speeches at this point. So those in favor of amendment number 13, please raise your cards. One, two, three. All right. Those against? Abstentions? 4 abstentions. So the amendment is rejected. We now move to amendment number 14, and I call on Miss Lindestam from Sweden to present.
Thank you, Chair. This is a new paragraph, and it comes from my heart, my deeply heart, and it's about death penalty. And I urge the government of Belarus to abolish the death penalty and immediately withdraw all issues death sentences. Thank you.
Thank you, Ms. Lindestam. Anybody wish to speak against this amendment? No? Yes? No? Yes. All right. Ms. Alimova from the Russian Federation.
Уважаемые коллеги, считается эта поправка совершенно неприемлемой, потому что есть ряд преступлений, которые требуют достаточно жестких применений, жестких мер к тем людям, в частности к террористам, которые своими действиями влекут многочисленные смерти и многочисленные неисчислимые бедствия для того или иного государства. Поэтому считаем, что эту поправку применять и принимать нельзя. Несмотря на то, что в прошлый раз мне не достало слова выступить, все-таки нельзя применять в качестве политического аргумента решение вопросов спортивных. Мы только что с вами обсуждали поправку, где вы говорили о том, что Беларусь должна идти на диалог. Но тем самым, принимая многочисленные поправки, мы закрываем ворота для проведения диалога. И в частности, когда проводятся спортивные состязания. Есть речь дружбы, доброго и соперничества, и поэтому вот то, что мы сегодня с вами делаем, это никоим образом не влечет к добрососедским, мирным и демократическим отношениям со страной Белоруссии.
I call on Mr. Tony Lloyd to give us his opinion on this amendment.
And I support this amendment. It's a long-standing call upon Belarus to abolish the death penalty, and this amendment is consistent with that call.
Thank you very much. So we put amendment number 14 to vote. Those in favor, please raise your cards. Thank you. Those against? 3, 4. Those in favor? Abstentions? 3 abstentions. All right. So amendment number 14 is adopted. We now have concluded our discussion. Point of order. Ms. Zaff, please.
Ich möchte gerne eine mündliche Änderung beantragen. Es geht dabei einfach um Deutschland, es geht aber auch um guten Geschmack. Nummer 11 ist eine Anmerkung einer totalen Entgleisung, einer oralen totalen Entgleisung von Lukaschenko gegenüber unserem Ministerpräsidenten und unserem Außenminister. Er hat gesagt, er wolle lieber einen Sohn haben, der Diktator ist, als einen Sohn, der schwul ist. Unser Außenminister ist bekennender Schwuler und ich bin stolz darauf, dass in unserem Lande sich die Politiker, die eine andere sexuelle Orientierung haben, nicht verstecken müssen. Wir haben den ersten Bürgermeister von Berlin, der sich dazu bekennt. Wir haben einen Ministerpräsidenten gehabt, der sich dazu bekannt hat. Wir haben viele führende politische Köpfe in den jeweiligen Ländern, die sich nicht mehr verstecken. Und ich bin stolz darauf, dass in meinem Lande das möglich ist. Aber ich finde, es ist eine Sache des guten Geschmacks und gehört gar nicht hier rein in diese Resolution, es sei denn, es wäre etwas, was speziell um die Rechte der anders sexuell Orientierten geht. Unser Außenminister hat selber darum gebeten, das in dieser Resolution nicht aufzuführen, weil er sagt, so etwas ignoriere ich einfach. Und ich glaube, das ist richtig. Deshalb appelliere ich an Sie, diese Nummer 11 einfach zu streichen und damit die Sache nicht in den Kontext der politischen Gefangenen und der Unterdrückung der Menschen, die in Belarus leben, zu bringen.
Okay. According to the rules, I'm told that we can accept oral amendments, but they need to be put to the vote of the committee. So I think we can also ask if anybody wishes to speak against this oral amendment to maintain paragraph 11, which, according to the proposal by Ms. Zaft, will be completely deleted from the resolution if approved. If no one is against, I'll call on Mr. Tony Lloyd for his opinion.
Well, Mr. McCatchy, I must say that whilst it is my own very strong view that I'd far sooner have a son who is gay rather than a son who is a dictator, nevertheless, I think we should leave this to the common sense of the committee. I won't oppose Ms. Zapp's resolution if that is how the German delegation and the German foreign minister feel we should proceed, and on that basis I'm happy to support this oral amendment.
All right, so we put the oral amendment by Ms. Zaff to the vote. Those in favor, please raise your cards. Thank you. Those against? None. Abstentions? None. So the amendment is unanimously approved by the committee. So we have now finished the discussion on the amendments, so we move to the vote on the draft resolution as amended. So those in favor of adopting the resolution, please raise your cards. Thank you. Those against? 3, 5 votes against. Abstentions? 1 abstention. So the draft resolution on Belarus, sponsored by Mr. Tony Lloyd, is adopted. Thank you very much. So we now move to the next point. So we have a point of order by our colleague from Belarus, Ms. Mazai. Please.
Спасибо, господин председатель. Уважаемые коллеги, делегация Белоруссии вчера достаточно подробно изложила свою позицию по предложенному господином Ллойдом проекту резолюции. Сегодня мы с сожалением отмечаем, что наш комитет так и не смог занять достойную позицию. Резолюция, которую мы только что проголосовали, не является конструктивной, явно не отвечает духу сотрудничества и диалога. Она идет в духе конфронтации, явно игнорирует уважение верховенства закона, демонстрирует нежелание объективно разобраться в ситуации, и со всей очевидностью это подтверждают комментарии, которые практически сегодня по каждому из пунктов резолюции представил господин Ллойд. Мы сожалеем, что комитет принимает такую резолюцию, отвергая дух сотрудничества и дух диалога. Делегация Беларуси продолжит активную работу в парламентской ассамблее, но мы надеемся, что наш комитет в следующий раз будет мудрее и объективнее. Спасибо.
Thank you, Ms. Mazai. It was not really a point of order. It was a political statement that you made on the resolution that was adopted by the committee. We accept that, but you had also the opportunity to express your opinion during the debate, and next time maybe you could use also that opportunity while participating in our work, as you're willing to continue to do, and we welcome that. We now move to the next point on the agenda, which is the presentation of the report on the theme of our assembly this year, which is the OSCE region of change by our...
Я прошу прощения, Россия, но в предыдущем, когда мы поднимали по вопросу, вы не давали выступить.
Asking, you cannot take the floor and speak if you don't ask, please. So if you have a point of order, please raise your card and I will give you the floor. You have a point of order? All right.
Уважаемый президиум, значит, вчера на комитете, когда был сделан доклад, было сказано, что обобщающее выступление можно будет сделать по делегациям. Сегодня прошли по поправкам, и вы не дали выступить по резолюции по Беларуси российской делегации. Хотя я поднимал карточку, вы ее, так сказать, либо не заметили, я не знаю почему. Поэтому я бы просил внимательно смотреть и предоставлять возможность делегациям высказать мнение, общее мнение по резолюции, а не по поправкам. Вы изменили, значит, ведение и не дали высказаться делегации.
I think we already discussed this yesterday, and at that point the debate was closed on the resolution, and I think we were clear about that, that there was no opportunity at that point to intervene on that agenda item. I'm sorry, we already discussed that yesterday, and that was clear. So we have now to proceed to the discussion of the report by our rapporteur, Mr. Çoskun Çorus, and then after this the general debate on the report and the draft resolution will follow. The time available for each member to speak will be necessarily limited due to time constraint, and I would kindly ask you if you can register as early as possible in the general debate on the report and the draft resolution as soon as possible. And also consider also if instead of speaking in the general debate, you can raise your points during the debate that will take place on the amendments, and there are many amendments also to the report. Then, after the general debate, we'll move to the discussion on the amendments and the voting procedure as we did just now. So I call on the rapporteur, Mr. Çoskun Çorus, to present his report. You have the floor.
Dear colleagues, Mr. Chairman, I'm honored to present my report to you this year here in the beautiful city of Monte Carlo. I would like to thank our host here, our colleagues from the delegation of Monaco for receiving us in this stunning place. Before I continue to present my report, I would also specially thank Anna Chernova from the International Secretariat for assisting me in the preparation of this report and its follow-up here at the annual session. Her expertise and advice were invaluable. In the report and the accompanying resolution that I present before the third committee here in Monaco, there will three main issues that I would like to discuss. Two of them, judicial independence and prison reform, were on the agenda for the committee's meeting in Vienna in February. The third one, regarding OSCE chairmanships, we also touched upon during the winter meeting. But we did not discuss explicitly. I will address that issue first, also because it has taken on some urgency. In my report, I argue that although the OSCE in the past decades has made substantial progress in many fields, for example, in the fight against human trafficking or the fight against terrorism, it has to be noted that change in the OSCE region in recent years has also included a regression in meeting OSCE human rights commitment in the third dimension in several of the participant states. The state of human rights in the OSCE area is not improving. By contrast, in some countries, it is particularly declining. I believe that there is rest in specific responsibility with the OSCE chairmanship to provide political leadership to the organization. That includes setting a good example with regard to observing OSCE commitments. Recent developments in the country that will chair the OSCE in 2013 in that regard have been worrisome. But also it has to be noticed promises of democratic reforms by a former OSCE chairman was not fully realized. Participant states have the ambition to preside over an organization such as the OSCE, can expect closer scrutiny of the way they fulfill their commitments to our organization's founding principles. And this goes for the Troika as a whole, for the incoming chairmanship, as well as for the outgoing. I therefore plan to call on participant states that hold the chairmanship of the OSCE now and in the future to set the standards for exemplary observance in their commitments in the human dimension and to plan for a follow-up and deepening of their commitments to OSCE standards, a mechanism for the period after their term in office. One of the amendments that has been tabled to this report by our colleague from the Germany delegation, Ms. Viola von Kramon-Taubadel, proposed to introduce an official review mechanism to assess participating states for a potential chairmanship role, including evaluation of the candidate's country implementation of the OSCE human dimension commitments. I believe this would be a good idea, and I can therefore already tell you that I will support this amendment. Now that we are discussing chairmanships, I think this is an appropriate moment to back to you on the visit that I paid earlier this week to Ms. Yulia Tymoshenko, the former Prime Minister of Ukraine, who is being detained in a hospital in Kharkiv. At the winter meeting, I reported you that my request to visit her has been denied by the Ukrainian authorities, just like that of our President, Petros Eftimiliou, and one of our Vice Presidents, Walburga Habsburg. I made another request, and I'm pleased to report that last Friday this was granted by the authorities. I talked with Ms. Tymoshenko for 2 hours. This Wednesday, in the hospital, I appreciate the Ukraine authorities allow me to visit her, and I hope, really I hope, this visit is the start of Ukraine showing a permanent commitment to its OSCE values and dialogue with the OSCE. I received conflicting reports about Ms. Tymoshenko's health. The medical director of the hospital informed me that her general condition is satisfactory and that she can walk with assistance. Ms. Tymoshenko herself, however, told me that her physical condition is not going good and that even with painkillers, she cannot walk or sit. Her recovery is hampered, she said, by the fact that she is under a lot of stress due to the detention. The continuing court proceedings against her and the permanent observation under which she is now lives. Ms. Tymoshenko and I discussed in detail the accusations against her, the interwoven structures of business, politics and the judicial system in Ukraine. She believes that she is the victim of a political trial, meant to keep her out of the outcoming elections in October, in which the current presidents consider her to be his main rival. She has appealed the ruling of the court that convicted her to 7 years in prison for abuse of power by signing a gas contract with Russia without putting it before Parliament. This cassation has been postponed until the 12th of July, but she has no illusions about the outcome of this appeal. She seems it as the necessary step to bring her case before the European Court of Human Rights. I discussed with her the recent ruling of the European Court that the arrest of a former Interior Minister, Yuri Lutsenko, was arbitrary, and that the government of Ukraine must pay 15,000 euro in damage. Ms. Tymoshenko told me that she hoped the court would rule similar in her case. We also discussed the new criminal procedure code in Ukraine, which I have positive feelings about. But overall, I must say that I have great concerns about the case, or I should say several cases, against Ms. Tymoshenko. It is of the utmost importance that the court proceedings against her will be transparent and allow for outside monitoring. I now come to the second element in my report, the importance of an independent judicial system. It has been stressed in all the major OSCE documents on the human dimension, most noted in the 1990 Copenhagen document and the 2000 Belarus declarations on criminal justice system. The right to a fair trial, to be an effective remedy, and the right to be subjected to arbitrary arrest or detention constitutes the base of rule of law. In my report, I stress the participant states should guarantee the transparency of the judicial processes. If they do not so, they run the risk that judicial decisions in the country are open to multi-interpretation and can be regarded as having politically motivated. This appearance should be avoided at all costs. There have been several high-profile cases recently in the OSCE area, some of which we will discuss at our session here in Monaco. through supplementary items and amendments. The third part of my report focuses on prison reform. While I was in Ukraine earlier this week, I had the chance to visit the Katyansky Penal Colony, the detention facility for women in Kharkov, where Yulia Tymoshenko was detained before she was brought to hospital on the 9th of May. I informed about the Swedish model that was introduced there several years ago, a concrete result of which is that now no more than 10 prisons sleep in a room together, while in the past up to 100 prisoners could have share a barrack. I was also shown the private cell in which Ms. Tymoshenko was held, and the prison medical center where she was treated for her physical problems. As far as I was able to judge, these prison conditions made a favorable impression on me, and I praise the State Penitentiary Service of Ukraine for their transparency and their willingness to allow me to inspect the prison. We have to realize that the OSCE primarily relies on the United Nations legal documents for setting standards for prison conditions, like the UN Standards Minimum Rules for the treatment of prisons. All OSCE participating states that have not yet done so should ratify the optional protocol to the United Nations Conventions against torture and other cruel, inhuman, or degrading treatment or punishment. Also, they should follow up on the recommendations in the final report of the Supplementary Human Dimension Meeting on Prison Reforms of 2002 that focus on measures to improve the physical conditions of prisons, alternative sentencing measures to reduce prison population, and to measure to rehabilitation prisoners. In the report, I point to the dilemma that we all faced in our countries. How to strike a balance between punishment and lawful deprivation of freedom on the one hand, and a prison regime in accordance with international standards of human rights on the other hand. With this in mind, it is good to realize, apart from the fundamental principles, that also detainees deserve to be treated with respect. Prisons should and need not become hotbeds of conflict, criminality, and instability. This is how the OSCE work in prison reform should be seen, as a part of a wider conflict mitigation approach. We can be proud of the efforts of the OSCE field missions in this regard. So, Mr. Chairman, so here are the outlines and main themes of the report and the resolution that I present to you today. I look forward to receiving your comments and suggestions on this. Thank you.
Thank you very much. Thank you, Mr. Choros, for your presentation of the report and the draft resolution. We now have the general debate open. So far, I have 4 members who have requested to speak, and I will close the list of speakers after the first meeting. So if you wish to speak, please tell the Secretariat to do so. And I would just ask you to keep your statement in 3 minutes, please. So we begin with Mr. Akhmetov Professor Akhmetov from the delegation of Kazakhstan. You have the floor, sir.
Thank you. Dear colleagues, I would like to thank Mr. Soros for his substantial report and the draft resolution and express our support to them as they are well-balanced and comprehensive. In this regard, let me underline that as a young democracy, Kazakhstan has never doubted the rightness of its choice since independence. My country is strongly committed to build truly democratic and free society ensure fundamental freedoms and human rights. However, this is not an easy task. We are facing a lot of challenges on this way. Availing of this opportunity, I would like to thank our European and American partners for their support and assistance to us. At the same time, our delegation has reservations with regard to some proposed amendments to the resolution. We will share our views during the discussion in due course. Thank you.
Thank you very much, Professor Akhmetov. So now I have also a request from Italy, Mr. Mantini. I will now close the list for the general debates. So if anybody wishes to speak, do it now or is not going to happen. So we move on now to the next speaker, who is Ms. Aslanova from Azerbaijan. You have the floor, madam.
Спасибо. Уважаемые коллеги, хотелось бы особо поблагодарить докладчика за вынесение на обсуждение данных вопросов. За прошедшие годы в пространстве ОБСЕ произошли существенные изменения в области прав человека. Общая ответственность за общие судьбы превратились в основной принцип. Государства-участники ОБСЕ, выполняя свои обязательства в области прав человека, доказывают свою приверженность принципам демократии и прав человека, реформируют судебную и пенитенциарную систему. Развитие демократии, тесная интеграция нашей страны в европейскую семью обусловили коренные реформирования правовой системы Азербайджана. Были приняты новые прогрессивные законы и кодексы, началась фундаментальная реформа по демократизации судов и повышению эффективности правосудия. Вступила в силу новая трехступенчатая судебная система. Был проведен первый в истории Азербайджана отбор судей, в результате которого судейский корпус обновился на 60%. Реформа судебной системы была также среди обязательств, взятых нашей страной перед Советом Европы. В настоящее время в рамках проводимых в стране правовых реформ принимаются последовательные меры по укреплению законности и правопорядка в пенитенциарной службе, обеспечению прав осужденных, созданию современной инфраструктуры пенитенциарной системы. Основа пенитенциарных реформ была заложена сразу после обретения независимости. Тюрьма не панацея в борьбе с преступностью, и ее нельзя рассматривать как доминирующий фактор. Реформа тюремной системы означает, что мы хотим иметь уголовно-исполнительную систему или исправительно-трудовую, или все-таки пенитенциарную систему. И мы должны вести разговор о тюрьме не как о системе исполнения наказания, а как об особом виде социальной клиники, которая должна обеспечить социальную регенерацию целого пласта людей, имеющих социальную патологию. В свое время Черчилль сказал: «Покажите мне ваши тюрьмы, и я скажу, в каком обществе вы живете». Реформирование тюремной системы – это новая тюремная философия. Мы начали реформирование системы создания нового законодательства. Основные направления были следующие: реформа тюремного законодательства, реформа самих тюрем и реформа тюремного персонала. И еще необходимо анализировать насколько само общество открыто для заключенных, насколько он готов воспринимать происходящие системы перемен. И в конце хотела сказать следующее. Понятие пенитенциарное означает покаяние. В 232 году Христианский собор объявил, чтобы вернуть человека к добру, можно только через покаяние. И, естественно, в этой философии мы должны руководствоваться данным положением. Спасибо за внимание.
Thank you, Ms. Aslanova. We now move to the next speaker, Mr. Rashkin from the Russian Federation, then Mr. Fitis from Cyprus. You have the floor.
Уважаемые коллеги, я очень благодарен докладчику Кошкун-Корсун за поднятые вопросы и считаю очень важным проведение в жизнь в законодательствах других стран, входящих в состав ОБСЕ, вопросов демократии, прав человека и гуманитарных вопросов. Однако считаю, что данный текст данного документа в целом представляется несбалансированным, поскольку в нем прослеживается явный перекос в сторону третьей корзины в ущерб остальным измерениям ОБСЕ, и делается акцент на гражданские и политические свободы при игнорировании проблематики экономических, социальных и культурных прав. В этой связи хотелось бы высказаться и по резолюции «Беларусь», которая поощряет принятое нами, считаю, что оно поощряет введение санкций, в том числе экономического характера, которые создают искусственные барьеры в торговле и приводят к ущемлению законных интересов экономической безопасности государств. В результате он наносит ущерб взаимовыгодному сотрудничеству, развитию интеграционных процессов. Такие меры экономического давления негативно отражаются в первую очередь на благосостоянии простых граждан. Инициатива с принятием резолюции по Беларуси контрпродуктивна по вполне понятным причинам. Принятие предложения односторонней тенденциозной резолюции не повышает уровень доверия и не укрепит сотрудничество между сторонниками принятия проекта и белорусским народом. И отдельно хочу отметить, что прозвучавшие выступления наших коллег из Финляндии и Великобритании в связи с обсуждением данного вопроса резолюции выдержаны полностью в духе холодной войны и не способствуют укреплению сотрудничества. Спасибо.
Thank you, Mr. Raskin. We now move to the next speaker, Mr. Fitis from Cyprus, and then Mr. Stoyan from Ukraine.
Thank you, Chairman. Dear colleagues, friends, I wish to express our appreciation to the Parliament of Monaco for its kind invitation and warm hospitality. Allow me to highlight a few points of our debate. I fully agree with our rapporteur in pointing out the existence of universal principles which underlie the very existence of the OSCE and should be respected by all and by all situations. Regrettably, what we are witnessing instead is international law and human rights being subjected to tailored trade interpretations by breaching states themselves, and what has often been even more disappointing by the international community. While spotlights are on transnational security threats and violations of human rights within states' respective territories, it is essential not to lose focus on human rights violations by OSCE participating states outside their territory. Even more so, when such violations are often the result of military aggression by a participating state against another participating state, like the case of Cyprus. In fact, conflicts constitute the major cause of people becoming refugees, internally displaced, or asylum seekers. According to the latest United Nations High Commission for Refugees, Global Trends Report 2011 has been a record year in new refugees, 800,000, bringing the total number of refugees internally displaced or asylum seekers to 42.5 million people. Addressing violations of human rights and fundamental freedoms constitutes an integral part of the OSCE conflict cycle. Greater emphasis should therefore be placed on the cause and effect relations between human rights violations and conflicts in the OSCE area. Regarding prison reforms, a recent development in my country, Cyprus, has been the release of people on the first life serving. The decision by the competent board has based on the competence of the applicant as well as on the right messages he chanced for a few start would send to convicts and society in general. The first release on parole in Cyprus takes place following an amendment to the prison laws in 2008 by which prisoners for life who have served at least 12 years of their sentence may have the possibility to serve the rest of their sentence out of prison upon authorization and under specific conditions. The need for the OSCE to uphold the fundamental principles for further enhancing its implementation oversight mechanisms including those pertaining to the human dimension, is essential for the sake of this organization's credibility and relevance to the new security environment. The OSCE Parliament should have a greater input to this end. Our view, that we have also expressed to the First Committee, is that the OSCE Parliament could envisage existing Parliament oversight of states' implementation of their OSCE commitments, also those pertaining to the human dimension. Thank you.
Thank you very much, Mr. Fittis. We now give the floor to Mr. Stoyan from the delegation from Ukraine, and then to Hadi Fry from Canada. You have the floor, sir.
Спасибо, уважаемый господин председатель. Я хочу сказать, что у докладе господина Жошкана Чуреза были затронуты вопросы, связанные с Украиной. И я отмечаю, что господин Чурез дал два позитивных момента, за что мы ему признательны. Первый позитивный момент, он сказал о том, что у нас и далее соблюдаются права демократии, расширяются и права человека. И второй позитивный момент, он, на мой взгляд, один из первых оценил тот позитив, те позитивные моменты, которые делает наше правительство по отношению к Юлии Тимошенко. Он, в частности, сказал, что он имел разговор с ней, и она лечится в нормальной больнице, созданы необходимые условия, специальные условия созданы. И мы, безусловно, желаем госпоже Тимошенко здоровья. Вот. Но я не совсем согласен с тем, что это, в общем-то, госпожа Тимошенко находится по политическим мотивам. Она совершенно не используется в политических мотивах. Мы знаем о том, что было совершено, к сожалению, должностное преступление, когда госпожа Тимошенко стала премьер-министром Украины. И за это должностное преступление она получила, безусловно, 7 лет тюремного заключения. Более того, вы знаете, уважаемые коллеги, хочу вас об этом проинформировать, что еще закончено одно судебное расследование. Оно совершенно не связано с политическими мотивами, потому что, когда совершала это преступление госпожа Тимошенко, она занималась экономикой. Она не была тогда ни в партии, ни в оппозиции, не была ни в правительстве. Речь идет о том, что под патронатом бывшего премьер-министра Павла Лазаренко, который был премьер-министром, он ей помогал заниматься вопросами, связанными с газовыми проблемами, возглавляла тогда энергетические системы. И, как стало известно сейчас, были не очень правильно проводились действия. Я мягко говорю об этом. Павел Лазаренко получил большие деньги, большие суммы денег, взятки, в том числе и от госпожи Тимошенко, это уже доказано. И он уехал в Америку, и там американские судьи Павла Лазаренко посадили за неправомерные действия. И поэтому, безусловно, сейчас идет расследование о незаконных действиях госпожи Тимошенко, об экономических преступлениях. Я не хотел бы, чтобы вы, уважаемые коллеги, это связывали с политикой. Тем более, что на завтра будет обговариваться резолюция Украины, которая совершенно не соответствует состоянию, объективному состоянию дел в нашем государстве. За последнее время мы приняли криминальный уголовный кодекс, который одобрен Советом Европы. Мы приняли, который одобрен Венецианской комиссией, закон о выборах, за который голосовало абсолютное большинство парламента, в том числе оппозиция. Закон о свободе слова, закон о свободе собраний. И думаю, не будет лишним напомнить, что все вы были свидетелями, насколько открыто, демократично, честно и гостинно мы провели Евро-12, и люди простые, которые приехали, могли убедиться в открытости и нашей политики, и нашей позиции. Поэтому я хотел бы, когда вот такие делаются доклады, наверное, не повязывать чисто с политикой, а отделять политику от экономических преступлений, и тогда это все будет на пользу нашему государству. Благодарю вас.
Thank you, Mr. Stoyan. Then we have Hadi Fry from Canada, and then the last speaker, Pierluigi Mantini from Italy. Hadi Fry, you have the floor.
Thank you very much, Chair. I want to congratulate the rapporteur on an excellent report, because I think it's time we talked about this. I want to highlight one of the most important things that he said, when he said it must be admitted that change in the OSCE region in recent years has, in some aspects, become regressive. And I think that if we do not continue to monitor and to check on where we're going, we can begin to regress without even knowing that we are, because we take for granted the fact that some countries had progressed so greatly and had become champions of human rights that we don't notice when they slip and they start going downhill for various reasons. And everyone always seems, in every nation state, that actually slips and falls always have excellent reasons for saying that it was okay for them to do it in this instance. I think as the rapporteur said in his report, one of the most important things is that human rights and certain values must transcend national borders and must, in fact, be universal. The concept of this universality is what I wanted to speak for. I think in many regions of the OSCE, I can speak to the fact that some of the changes in democracy have been covert, so to speak. They've not been overt, they have not been open, no one can point a finger, but they have been subtly regressing. And we look at elections and we talk about free and fair elections. Many countries have gotten away with not having free and fair elections because we believe that they're such advanced nations that they would never do that. And there are questions about whether or not we should be looking at monitoring all of the regions in the OSCE, including some sort of monitoring for the sake of checking countries that we think are doing very well. You take adherence to the rule of law. We have seen countries that have actually subverted the rule of law. They don't openly deny rule of law, but what they do is they find arcane and old clauses within legislation that they bring back. And they say times have changed and we need to bring back these old subversive kinds of pieces of legislation that trample on people's human rights. And I think we've heard again my colleague from Cyprus speaking about the rights of refugees. We have watched how refugees, in terms of rule of law, international rule of law, there have been refugees who have gone to countries where they have been denied basic human rights, basic health care, or access to health care. We talked about an independent judiciary, which is one of the hallmarks of a democracy. And we have seen in countries where judges are now being told that they are interfering in the behavior of parliamentarians, when all the judges are doing is pointing out to parliamentarians that they are actually subverting their own rule of law. In fact, they're not following their own rule of law, and pointing this out, which is all the judiciary is supposed to do, and people seem to think that this is in fact something that causes the judiciary to be at question and the judiciary to be interfering. And I think we have to be careful of those. Political pluralization, I think that is another problem. We see democracies where opposition are ignored, opposition are denied the ability and the right to speak or to debate bills or to vote in a manner in which you can move the agenda forward, and we have executive branches of government who have decided that they are Parliament. I think civil society, we have seen this, and I'm not naming countries here, because I think the countries know who they are. If you talk about civil society, where non-governmental bodies are not being funded by governments, or if they've been funded from outside of other governments, they are actually bringing in arcane roots of law that are saying that they have to stop, that they cannot get that funding, and we see that happening with environmental groups across the country. What I wanted to say is that what this report has basically said is that the Organization for Security and Cooperation must be relevant. We question the relevance of this group many times here. But to be relevant, it must be effective. To be effective, it must actually obey its own values and its own rules. And so we cannot turn a blind eye, and we cannot reward bad behavior because of protocols. So let us really be effective. Thank you very much, Mr. Chair.
Thank you, Heidi Fry. The last speaker is now Pierluigi Mantini from Italy. You have the floor.
Grazie Presidente, voglio anch'io complimentarmi con il collega Coruz che ha presentato questa risoluzione che è molto importante. Noi la condividiamo, la sosteniamo, siamo nell'epoca della globalizzazione dell'economia e della finanza, occorre anche la globalizzazione dei diritti umani, o perlomeno lo spread, uso una parola ora ricorrente in economia, non deve essere troppo forte. Le differenze tra gli standard di rispetto dei diritti umani nei paesi non deve essere troppo rilevante. Questo vale per il tema della tortura, vale per la lotta, l'impegno contro la pena di morte, per le condizioni di civiltà nelle carceri, dove c'è qualche problema di sovraffollamento anche in Italia, vale per gli abusi dei cosiddetti reati politici, come nel caso Timoshenko e non solo, vale nel rispetto dei diritti religiosi, nel diritto alle elezioni libere e legali, nel rispetto dei diritti dei rifugiati e dei richiedenti asilo. Dobbiamo fare di più e dobbiamo tendere con le azioni dell'OSCE, che si occupa di questa terza dimensione già dal Trattato di Helsinki, ma poi sono stati richiamati i documenti di Madrid, la dichiarazione di Astana. Dobbiamo tendere agli standard più alti. Ho ascoltato alcuni colleghi anche della Federazione Russa quasi suggerire un accontentarsi degli stili nazionali, di quello che c'è. No, come OSCE dobbiamo tendere agli standard più alti. In materia di diritti umani non possiamo fare e farci sconti, non possono esserci troppe differenze tra di noi. Per questo sosteniamo la risoluzione, crediamo che Yulia Timoshenko debba partecipare alle elezioni politiche, che le missioni OSCE in Bielorussia vada riaperta e dunque con uno spirito comune, con il dialogo, con la collaborazione, dobbiamo darci però obiettivi più forti e più ambiziosi. Grazie.
Grazie Mantini per il suo intervento. We now close the general debate. I think we are 4 minutes to 1, and at 1 o'clock we also have the gender lunch, so I think we can stop our works here to prepare for the lunch, and then we can reconvene in the afternoon at 2:30 in this room, and we will begin with the consideration of the amendments to the draft resolution presented by Mr. Çoskun Çoros. Thank you very much, and see you later. Bye-bye.